Hi everybody, welcome to my living room slash office. Um, Today we're going to be going over the Chapter 6, Section 1 vocabulary list. So in order for you to follow along and take notes, you're going to need your vocab list in front of you, either printed from the documents I gave you on Schoology or written out with skipped lines in between. Hopefully you've already started your vocab list and this will just be added on notes to the ones you've already done. This is just going to be a quick preview, just like we would do in class. So please make sure that you're following along and you can pause while you write down some notes as we go. Bear with me. This is the first of hopefully many videos from me from here in my living room. So I'm going to get started. First of all, if you have not already seen this, this is how you access the online textbook, remember. I showed you guys earlier in the year, but this is a good reminder. So when you are in your history class, so this one's period 4, you'll go to your materials over here, and then it's the first item right here. When you click on that, it'll open up your textbook, which looks like this. So in order to access the textbook, you're going to go right over here. It says English e-edition, and you can find your unit and chapter that we're working on. So we are in Unit 2. We are on Chapter 6. And the Chapter 6 Introduction. Here's our vocab list. It's a little bit different from your vocab list, the way that it looks in your textbook. Also, thank you, Alina, you pointed out that the list that I gave you is different from the list in your textbook. It turns out my textbook is a little bit different from yours. So we have a couple of words that are found twice. I think Dharma was the one, and then also Vedic Civilization was not on your vocab list because it was not on mine in my actual textbook. So just like what we found with a couple of other words that are not in the glossary so far, sometimes there's going to be some differences and some mistakes as well. We'll just go with it. So do the list that I gave you, that's fine. You can add the details and add the extra words if you'd like at the end. We'll get to those when we get to that lesson. So I'm really excited to learn about Chapter 6 with you guys. Ancient India is one of my favorite chapters, actually. We are going to be learning about some really interesting things like the beginnings and foundations of 2 major world religions, Buddhism and Hinduism, that came from the Indian subcontinent. All right, if you're following along in your actual textbook, you can turn to page 142. You don't have to, but you can if you'd like. So usually in class I'd say, look at the key vocab words, read them to yourself and count how many and show me. And this one would be a pretty difficult one to show me because there's a lot of vocab words, like I said in my introduction on it. The caste system is the first vocab word. This is on page 149 in your textbook. For key vocab, I'm not going to go over all of them in detail. I'll just touch on a few because we have a lot of names and places on this one. So the caste system, on page 149 in your textbook, this is the social class hierarchy that was developed by the ancient Aryans, actually, that came to the Indus Valley region. This was a very, very strict and rigid social class system. This was partially based actually on race, as far as historians can tell. Some of the people who were in charge, they put themselves at the top. Those were the priests. And then the people on the bottom were the people that were originally from that area. We're going to be learning about how there's even one group that was considered below the social class system completely. They were known as a very offensive term, the untouchables. This caste system actually dictated who you could marry, who you could socialize with, where you could live, even what you could eat, in addition to the job that you did. And you were born into it, and that could not change, not in this lifetime at least. We'll go through the others just really quickly. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but we have Dharma, epic poem, karma. All 3 of these are connected to religion in some way in this chapter. Monsoons, we're going to be learning about that in the very first lesson tomorrow. Nirvana, that's not just a band from the 90s, for those of you who know it. It is a term that goes with Buddhism. planned city. You're going to be finding out about some planned cities, and we'll talk about those and the names and places in a minute. Reincarnation. This is a belief in rebirth of the soul after you die in this lifetime. This is a belief in many religions and for many people spiritually throughout the world, even today. And in Buddhism and Hinduism, there's a belief in reincarnation. Subcontinent. We're going to be learning about that in the first lesson as well. And then yoga. You might be surprised to see that there, but you're going to learn about how that's connected to the religion we're talking about, actually religions we're talking about in this chapter. All right, let's tackle these names and places, guys. Get your pens and pencils ready. The Aryans, I've already mentioned them once. They're a group of people originally from Central Asia. According to most sources, at least. You're going to find out about how there's some historians that maybe argue that point now in your history book. They migrated to the Indian subcontinent. They brought and created a lot of different changes. Some of them could be considered good changes, and some of them could be considered changes that were not so great for the people that lived there. For the Aryans, you're looking at page 148, if you wanted to flip to that. And we're going to be talking about how there were many changes that they brought about underneath this section of impact on Indian society. Now I'm going to point this out. This is slightly different in my textbook than it is in the online textbook, so I don't know if yours is different as well. Don't be too worried about it. It's very similar, and we'll work through it when we get to this lesson. You're going to want to read about how they had an impact on the Indian society, the Aryans. We're going to be talking about how they developed a new language, new written language. They brought new religious beliefs and combined those with some of the beliefs of the native people there. And they were the ones who started this system called the caste system that I already talked about. All right, let's go on to the next word, which is Brahmanism. It's actually going to stay on this same page. We're going to be talking about Brahmanism being some of the original religious beliefs of the Aryans. All right, next word, moving on, we have Buddhism. When we're talking about Buddhism, we're talking about the religion started by this guy named Siddhartha Gautama, one of your other names on this list. So if you want to write that down for him as well, feel free. He's also known as the Buddha. The Buddha is the term that means the enlightened one. So we're going to be learning about Siddhartha and his life and how that led him into the beliefs that turned into Buddhism. This is the newer of the two religions. We're going to be two major world religions we'll learn about in this chapter. So Buddhism is newer than Hinduism. The ideas of Buddhism are based on the beliefs that there's suffering in the world, that this is a reality, that there is suffering in the world, but that we can actually relieve our suffering through following some of the steps that the Buddha lined out for his followers. A lot of those steps have to do with leading a good life, a moral life. And so we're going to be talking about two parts to this, two big beliefs that go along with Buddhism. And those are the Four Noble Truths. You see that here, Four Noble Truths. So you can learn about that. And then also this idea called the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path. In your textbook, it's a sidebar. The Eightfold Path looks like this in the digital text. The ideas here, I think you're going to find some similarities with something else that we've learned about recently. So we'll make some connections when we get to this part of the chapter. So some rules to follow, basically. All right, let's move on. We have the Ganges River next. The Ganges River and the Indus River are the two big river systems that we're going to be talking about on the Indian subcontinent. So you're going to find those in section 1, the geography of ancient India. And actually, I want you to look at when you are when you are doing this part of the vocab list, I want you to look at the map. That map on page 144 in your textbook will be helpful. You can kind of trace the patterns of the rivers that are there. So a couple of details for the Ganges and Indus rivers. You can look on the map to see, and I don't know if this is going to load or not on my page. We'll see. Ah, yes. All right, it's a little hard to see. The Ganges and the Indus River both start way up here in the Himalayan mountains. So you can write that down. They both start in the Himalayan mountains. So they're fed by the snow that happens each year there. And they flow in opposite directions. So what I want you to do is look at the map and find out, where does the Indus River flow? Where does the Ganges River flow? Where do they end? Just like we talked about for the Nile River, how it ended and opened up into the Mediterranean Sea. So go back to the map to make sure you got those details for the Ganges and Indus rivers. Obviously, or at least I hope obviously at this point, that is where some of the first civilizations started, were the river valleys on the Indian subcontinent. All right, next up we have 2 cities in ancient times, and that's going to be in lesson 2. So we have this idea of the Harappan Civilization. The Harappan Civilization included large cities, 2 of them, one called Mohenjo-Daro and one called Harappa. So if you look at your vocab list for names and places, you can find both of those. We're going to be talking about these sort of as they're connected, so you can write about both of them. These are major cities, so you can write that for both of them, major cities. And they're both in the on the Indian subcontinent. They're some of the very first cities in a civilization that we refer to as the Harappan Civilization or the Indus Civilization, because as you can see here, ancient India's Indus River Valley is where they were located. You can write those notes down as well. India's Indus River Valley. These cities were incredibly well planned, and here's that vocab word, well planned, or planned cities. Okay, that means that they were actually built with a layout and features that are sort of mimicking what we would see in modern times in some ways. So they thought about where they were putting things. They made defensive walls around their cities, which we did see in other ancient cities, but there's more about that. They thought about where they were going to put their storage to store grain. They had roads that were laid out in a grid pattern. So they were organized and you could find different things. You can see that they thought about it and planned it out as it grew. The text goes on to tell you this surprising fact, which is pretty crazy. It says homes had indoor plumbing with a bathroom and a toilet that emptied into excellent underground sewers. This is crazy, you guys. This is, what, 5,000 years ago? That's pretty much unheard of. So when they say planned cities, this is what they're talking about, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. You'll be able to find other details about those 2 cities to add to your notes and your vocab as well. All right, I'm almost out of time, so let's see what's next. Hinduism. There's a whole lesson all about Hindu beliefs and practices. That's chapter 6, section 1, lesson 4. Please make sure that you actually find a few different details to write down. First of all, it can be traced back to when the Aryans came to the Indus Valley region. They mixed their beliefs with some of the traditional beliefs of the people there, and that eventually morphed into what we see as Hinduism today. Please remember, as we're learning about these religions, we are learning some basic historical details and beliefs. That doesn't mean that everybody that practices the religion practices it the exact same way. So keep that in mind. We talked about that for Judaism as well. Hinduism is the world's 3rd largest religion in modern times, which is pretty crazy. That means it has the 3rd most amount of people throughout the world that practices it. They do believe in many deities. However, remember that means gods and goddesses. However, they're all considered to be a part of the universal spirit, Brahman. All right, I'm going to post up another video that will